speak. My name is Heather Wood, and I'm subbing in for Allison tonight because she is unfortunately not feeling so well. So could you please all send her good healing thoughts? All right, it is my great pleasure to be introducing our actual host and who will then be introducing our fabulous writers this evening, afternoon. I can never tell when someone's supposed to be. But before I do that, I'm going to do a little land acknowledgement. Junction reads always open with a land acknowledgement as a reminder that we exist here in a country called Canada because of the colonial actions of the settlers who came before us. Reconciliation requires more than this acknowledgement. We must consistently and mindfully recognize our colonial history and accept our responsibilities to care for the land and its resources and for all the people who are here and who were here before us. Colonialism, occupation, and genocide should not be an acceptable part of our collective histories. Junction Reads exists in what is currently called Toronto on the treaty land of the Mississaugas of the Credit. It includes the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We recognize the continued displacement and colonization of First Nations peoples across Turtle Island. We are grateful to work in the community and on this territory, and I always encourage people as one small little thing you can do in terms of reconciliation. There are wonderful books by Indigenous authors in this bookstore and in the library. Please buy them and read them. Thank you so much. And now, it is my great pleasure to introduce our evening's guest host, the amazing Adelle Purdham, who is a parent disability activist. Oh my God. I'm trying to say advocate and activist at the same time. Now I've made a new word. Advocate. And the author of the memoir and essays, I Don't See Disability and Other Lives I've Told Myself, which came out from Dundurn Press last fall, and was named a fall 2024 book, most anticipated memoir and biography by Indigo and 49 Show. Her prose and poetry appear in literary journals, anthologies, magazines, newspapers, and online. Adelle's essays are finalists in several literary contests, including the Writers' Union of Canada Short Prose Competition, Event Magazine, and the Fiddleheads Creative Nonfiction Contest. Adelle has an MFA in Creative Nonfiction and is a qualified French teacher. She currently works as a sessional part-time faculty member at Trent University, where she teaches creative writing in her hometown, Niagara in Peterborough, Ontario. She's also pretty awesome. Please welcome Adelle.
What a lovely introduction. Can everyone hear me okay? Is it coming through the mic? Lift it up a bit. How's that? Better? Worse? Better? Okay. Hi, welcome everyone. It's my great pleasure to introduce our first reader and author of this evening, Lucy E.M. Black. Lucy studied creative writing at the undergraduate level and later earned her master's degree in 19th century British fiction. She's the author of The Marzipan Fruit Basket, Eleanor Court Town, Stella's Carpet, The Brickworks, and Class Lessons, Stories of Vulnerable Youth. And her latest, A Quilting of Scars, that we're going to talk about this evening. She has also been a student at the Sage Hill School of Writing and the Humber College School of Writing. Lucy received the Writer of Distinction Award from Humber College. Lucy's short stories have been published in Britain, Ireland, USA, and Canada in a variety of literary journals and magazines. She lives in Port Perry, Ontario, the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nations. Please, everyone, welcome Lucy.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming. Can everyone hear me? So A Quilting of Scars is the story of one character whose name is Larkin Beatty. Larkin is telling us his story in 1909. Larkin is a farmer near the end of his life, and he is remembering a tragic fire that took place across the road from his own farm when he was a child, and 2 men died in that fire. Larkin knows what happened, what caused the fire, and how those men died. but he keeps the truth of that to himself, along with a number of other secrets. And those secrets are a burden for him, and they shape his life. So I'm going to read 3 very short passages to you, just to give you a little flavor of the book. And the first comes from the opening passage, and it's about Larkin. Cemetery Hill, April 10th, 1909. Today was a breeding day. Larkin Beatty and his horse were due at the stables by 10. Culloden, a dark bay stallion, 16 hands high and 5 years of age, was a proven foal getter. One of his colts had already taken a first at Georgetown. Limping slightly, Larkin crossed the kitchen to the cellar door and made his way carefully down its steep steps. He took in the stench of stagnant groundwater leached from the soil, now moistening the stone walls with a dank musk like stale urine. The spring earth hissing away the last of winter. A brief skittering betrayed the presence of mice, fleeing his intrusion. Larkin reached down to draw out what he sought from deep slatted crates, and then returned to the kitchen, apples and carrots bulging his pockets. A habit born of years trying to detract from his height meant that he slouched forward as he walked. He unhooked a barn coat from the keg, and as he pulled it on, he moved outside into the stinging chill. The groom he hired was waiting by the wagon. Larkin climbed aboard, his rheumatic leg dragging only a little. So just your introduction to Larkin. And now a little about Larkin's farm. So the fire has taken place, and Larkin is reflecting on things. And yet, as in the way of such things, in the weeks to come, the rhythms of the farming community resumed. People were drawn once more into the routines of their days. A farm in late summer, after all, is a greedy thing, demanding complete devotion. Those who lived their lives on its soil understood what was needed and bent to their labors. And so it was that despite the shock and the upset of the Skinner fire, the community gradually shifted its focus to all that the earth had required. The third passage that I will read you is about the impact of the secrets that Larkin carried. The burden of secrets followed Larkin like a dark shadow, always there, a black, menacing shape. Every now and then the darkness would startle him. He'd have to brace his legs firmly and hold his ground, lest he disappear into the blackness. It was nothing that others could see or hear or feel, but it was attached to him. It would rise up and appear at will. Sometimes he'd feel a prickling at the back of his neck, and he'd stand still, waiting for the tingling to run up and down his arms. And then his chest would tighten, and he'd have trouble breathing. The panic would choke him as he flapped his arms, pacing back and forth till he wore himself out. And then eventually, at last, it would subside. His ma referred to these events as his spells. She was sure Doc Bather would have a powder for a cure, but Larkin steadfastly refused to even see him. The fleeting horror of the attacks marked Larkin. He was afraid of them. He tried to fight them off when they began, but didn't always succeed. His pa had found him once in the barn, in the middle of one. He'd stood back and watched Larkin flapping his arms, pacing furiously. And then his pa just walked over and pulled him in against his chest and held him tightly. And he held him without saying a word for maybe 20 minutes. And Larkin felt surprisingly calmed by that closeness, by his paw's touch. And he liked to remember the feel of his paw, the stubble on his face scratching against his own, the smell of pipe smoke lingering on his jacket and shirt, the gloved hands gripping his forearms tightly while pulling him into an embrace. And then the feel of them, strong and comforting on his back, making patterns of small circles. It was the embrace of a man who could fix almost anything.
Thank you, Lucy. That was lovely. I'm going to now introduce our next reader for this evening. Kevin, if you'd like to come up.
I thought I'd wait up to that.
You can, we can see who we're doing. K.R. Wilson has a Bachelor of Music degree from the University of Calgary, which might explain all musical references in his writing. His debut novel, An Idea About My Dead Uncle, won the inaugural Guernica Prize for Unpublished Manuscript in 2018 and was published by Guernica in 2019. His novel, Call Me Stan, A Tragedy in 3 Millennia, was published in 2021 and was longlisted for the 2022 Leacock Medal for Literary Humor. His SF noir novel, Tendrils, will be published by Palimpsest Press in early 2027. His work has also appeared in Bywords, The Thames Review, Syncopation Literary Journal, Dark Winter Literary Magazine, Pinhole Poetry, and the short story anthologies This Will Only Take a Minute and Sticks and Stones. Kevin grew up in Calgary, but makes his home in Toronto. Can we please give him a warm welcome?
Lovely introduction. And I have to give Allison a more abbreviated biography first. Future dates. Stand on Guard is a sequel to my previous novel, Call Me Stan. And talking about it will necessarily include some spoilers for Call Me Stan. Toward the end of that book, the narrator, Stan, who is a 3,200-year-old immortal, has acquired a nemesis who left him for dead in a drab room in post-war Berlin. And this book gets us a little bit meta because, as it turns out, the publication of the first book could have some consequences. So I'm just going to read the opening, and I think this will clarify that. It's in two voices, Stan, alternating with Crowan, is also immortal nemesis. Stan. I have a bone to pick with K.R. Wilson. I've always been careful about who I trust with my story. When a police stenographer transcribed it a few years ago, I wasn't concerned. It was never going to be a public document. Until it was. Imagine my surprise. Somehow this guy got his hands on it, cleaned out the ums and ers and phonetic spellings and awkward repetitions you always find in transcripts, cut out everything that interviewing cop said, and published the result as fiction, which would have been fine on its own. I don't need credit for my prose. I have to assume it's better than this Wilson character. And I certainly don't need the money. Whatever he made from it will be trifling next to the hourly interest on my sheltered Caribbean accounts. The problem is Troan. I have to assume Troan has read it. And if she has, she knows I'm still alive. Troan. Imagine my surprise. I thought I'd killed him. Ishtanu of the Hatti. I shot him in the heart, watched the light leaving his eyes. Now I know I failed. He was stupid to tell his story. You only tell someone you can trust. The police he told his story to could not be trusted. I won't fail if I find it again. So the present day arc of the book is then a cat and mouse narrative involving those two, with very lengthy digressions into historical periods that they've each lived through and are recounted to us. So at this point, I want to do a little choose your own adventure kind of thing. By show of hands, which of them do you want to hear from next, Stan or Trollon? Stan? Trollon? I think it's Trollon. Okay. By show of hands. We're doing Trollon in the early 20th century in and around Paris. Do you want her with the dancer Isidore Duncan or with the sculptor Auguste Rodin? All right, show of hands. Duncan? Or Rodin? No? The Duncan people are outvoted. This scene starts, Rodin he's aging and he's afraid of death, and he's found a young American woman who has married into French nobility, who's kind of been keeping him from his real home where he lives with his longtime partner, and kind of keeping him from his work. So Trollon, with her sidekick Rainer Maria Rilke, have essentially kidnapped Rodin from the marquise who is keeping him from his work, and taken him back to his little house in Meudon where he lives with Rose, his partner. Rodin slept late and woke in a mood. I found him in his kitchen, warming his hands around a cup of coffee, face slack, eyes dull. He looked up at me as I came in, still in last night's gown. You're still here? Rilke and I are staying for a while. Why? You need a break from the marquise. He picked a coffee ground from his tongue and wiped it on his napkin. Perhaps, he said, nodding slowly, but that doesn't explain why you're staying. You need a line of defense. Nonsense. Claire wouldn't come here. And if she did, I wouldn't let her stay. Rose lives here, for God's sake. Maybe not, but you might let her take you back to the Hotel Biron. He just looked away, which is an answer enough. Come, I nodded toward his studio. Let's go. Go where? Your studio. Let's get you to work. I don't have anything in progress here. Then work on something new. I don't feel like it. Honestly, it was like dealing with a child. Then make yourself feel like it. You need to work. It's all I could think of that might restore the spark to his eyes. I tried to lift him to his feet. Maybe later. Not later. Now. He stood reluctantly, followed me into the yard. I couldn't imagine him being this biddable when I'd encountered him before. I nudged him into his studio. The morning light from its large windows picked out dust motes in the air and gave the bricks of the cold kiln a warm glow. It was quiet and empty, cluttered with drop cloths and chisels and spools of thick wire, but no workers, no sculptures, nothing to spur him on. He slumped into a wooden chair at a workbench and stared at the floor. What would you like to work on? Nothing. Tell me some new ideas. You must have ideas. No, I don't. What about one of the figures from the gates of hell? I can't keep recycling old ideas. Then something fresh. I have no fresh ideas. Gods, this was annoying. I reached behind myself and unfastened my gown. It slid to the floor. I had nothing on underneath it. Rodin's head jerked up. Are you mad? Put that back on. He looked through the windows toward the house and then back at me. Rose is right over there. Don't be a fool, Auguste. I'm not trying to seduce you. I'm trying to inspire you. I stepped out of the puddled gown. If you don't have any ideas, then start with a figure study. He shook his head. I don't have it in me. That's too bad, because I'm going to stand here naked until you make a start. He looked back toward the house, then back at me. You can't be serious. Completely. But you're not a model, you're in society. So what? I looked at him appraisingly. Are you starting to show signs of bourgeois morality? That uncomfortable notion hung in the air between us for a moment. Fine, he finally said. He took a lump of clay from a container under the workbench, slapped it onto the work surface, and gestured to a spot at the end of the bench. Stand over there, he said, arms at your sides. He massaged the clay into an upright oblong. Bend your knees a little. This may take some time. By lunchtime, he'd made a 10-inch model of my torso and legs. I'm hungry, he said. Let's get Rose to make some lunch and work on the head and face this afternoon. No face. Why not? I stepped into my gown. As you said, I'm part of society. Tucked the gown up over my shoulders. I don't mind my breasts on display in some duke's breakfast room, but I draw the line at having all of society know whose they are. He looked at the model like he was seeing it for the first time. You think I should make a finished sculpture? To sell? Of course to sell, I said. I secured the gown's fasteners. It's a Rodin. Even that grotesque crouching figure back at the Hotel Biron will say. That's a work in progress she'd seen earlier. He laughed just slightly, barely a puff of air through his nostrils. It was the first sign of life I'd seen since Soroka walked me into his rooms the day before. What's funny about that? I asked. He looked at me like a naughty boy caught imitating his schoolmaster. For a moment, I thought you meant Claire de Choiseul. There was that light in his. Just for a moment.
Lovely. Thank you, Kevin. I'm going to now introduce our third reader and author for this evening. Ashraf Zaghal is a Palestinian-Canadian author. He has published 4 Arabic poetry collections, and his work has been translated into English, French, and Hebrew. Some of his poems have appeared in the literary review, Metamorphosis, and Transference, English. Anthologie de la poésie palestinienne d'aujourd'hui and Interlude poétique de Palestine, French, and in Iton 77 and Literature Between Two Languages, Hebrew. He edits an online magazine concerned with progressive literature and translations. He graduated from the University of British Columbia with an MFA in creative writing and lives between Toronto and Jerusalem. Please welcome Ashraf.
To be here among talented writers, and thank you for coming on a Sunday evening, late afternoon. My novel is about 3 Palestinian teenagers growing up amid escalating violence in Jerusalem between 2015 and 2016. I will read a couple of pages from after the scene when their friend gets killed in East Jerusalem. Sorry, I'm not bringing much humor. October 23rd. A soldier shouted my name. I got up, grabbed my things, phone, wallet, birth certificate, and walked through the metal gate. Outside the police station, Uncle Fahmy was waiting for me. He wrapped my shoulders with a blanket. I promised your mother I would keep you warm, he said. as we walked down a narrow street. It was dark, and we were alone on the sidewalk. I stretched out my arm and touched the nettle leaves on the low walls. I touched the dew on the leaves, and my stomach ached. My uncle looked at his phone. I pulled out mine. The screen was broken, the battery dead. When I asked him the time, he said, 4 in the morning. Can I use your phone? Let's cross the road first, he said, swinging a small thermos in his hand. We crossed the wide, empty road bordering the city walls. Then we looked over our shoulders as the traffic lights changed color. In front of a small store that had stacks of crates at the doorstep and a tattered awning, my uncle opened his thermos and poured stale coffee on the ground. He then disappeared inside the store, and I sat outside on a bench. I gazed at my sticky hands, opening and closing all 10 fingers to feel the traces of last night. I stretched my eyes open to stay awake for the dawn prayer. When angels clamber down from the seventh heaven to scrub dust and static off Jerusalem's stones and door hinges. When they sweep the believers' floors, heat their water and clean their bed sheets. An old man sat beside me. He wore a thin shirt and held a lighter. He coughed. It was windy and he was shivering. I could give him my silly blanket. I had no use for it. I was shivering no matter what. Wind or no wind, I was shivering. Then I threw up. A strange liquid, the color of amba sauce, burst out of me. He did not get mad at me. He patted me on the back and told me to let it all out. Then my uncle came, tore off a piece of bagel and gave it to me. This will help your stomach, he said. And I took the bagel and bit into it. On our way home through the old city, the souk and the winding alleyways, pigeons brushed against low arches. Some descended onto our path, picking at trampled vegetables and candy wrappers. Some stayed on the roofs. Faint lights came from behind grated windows. Kettles clattered, and the pulse of weary waters seeped through the cracks. Lazy feet scraped the floors behind the windows, and the smell of worn carpets clutched the iron bars. So this is the first part. The second one will be quick. It has more joy. October 24th, this is just after Aziz came back from school, late afternoon. When I got home, my aunts were visiting. I came in and they threw themselves on my chest, kissing me 4 times on the cheek. They asked how I was, and I said, Alhamdulillah for everything. My mother was frying eggplant in a deep pan. I stood beside her, glancing at a strip of salted fried eggplant laid on a ceramic plate. I shoved it into my mouth. It burned my tongue. He's taller than you now, my older aunt told my mother. Then she started telling stories about her youngest son, who had beaten a gang of thugs on his own a week before. They threatened him with swords, she said, eyes wide. They wanted to take his parking spot by our door, but he stood up to them. Now he has 2 parking spots. My other aunt, whose hair was dyed with henna, said, Mashallah, the whole town talks about your son's courage. I realized I had not greeted my grandparents, who sat near the back door and said nothing. I kissed their hands, and my grandfather seated me beside him. I swear to Allah, I miss you, he said. Why didn't you come to the olive harvest? School, I said, and he nodded. He always nodded when I gave short answers. Thank you.
Hey, that was lovely. Thank you so much. Is everyone comfortable here? Okay. So now we're going to go into sort of a Q&A portion of the evening. So audience, if you want to start thinking about what are my questions for later, just keep them in your head for about 45 minutes and then you'll get a chance to ask them. But I'm going to ask each of the authors an individual question, and then I have a few questions that are for the whole group. So to begin, a question for Lucy E.M. Before I ask you my question, I just want to begin with some praise for A Quilting of Scars. This work is a masterclass in murder mystery writing. Lucy, you have a knack for unfurling the just right details at the just right time to hold readers in suspense. Additionally, A Quilting of Scars is full of lush, earthy descriptions that evoke the senses and contains complex, nuanced characters. The book is rich with historical details, including the rural farming dialect from 100 years ago that somehow Lucy gets just right. It's pretty incredible. In this book, Lucy, you delve into some pretty heavy themes, including sexual abuse, death, and queer sexual desire, though they wouldn't have called it that back then. And you tackle these themes from a male perspective, from Larkin Beattie's point of view. So how did you find Larkin's voice and embody that voice on the page? That's my question. How did you find Larkin's voice and embody that voice on the page? And how do you bring a historical character to life who has experiences much different from your own?
This is the part where you're all going to think that I'm bonkers. But when I began to research the character, I spent a lot of time researching farm life in the period, and then began to shape a character based upon a name, which was Larkin, and continued to do a deep dive into things like horse breeding and some farming practices of the period. And suddenly Larkin walked into my head, and the character was fully formed. I saw how he walked with a bit of a limp. I heard how he spoke. I knew what kind of clothing he wore. And Larkin told me his story, and I just transcribed it.
Okay, that's amazing. Thank you, Lucy.
I'm not bonkers at all.
Now I've got a specific question here for Kevin. Kevin, what a compelling series of events you've strung together and stand on guard. To hold the reader's attention, at its core, a novel needs a pressing question that the reader wants answered. It's why we keep reading, right? And what makes Stand on Guard so sweeping and epic is that as readers, we want to know, is Trowan going to catch Stan, right? And we want to know when and how the lives of these two immortals are going to coincide. The threat of Trowan is real, and she/they are such a badass character with strong feminist leanings. I adored them. This novel is a grand adventure filled with oversized personalities and a riotous trip through time where readers encounter prominent historical figures reimagined. So Kevin, I noted in the acknowledgements that you've listed some of the key works that you consulted when researching various historical contexts that come up in the book. Could you speak to the level of research that went into this novel and also touch on balancing fact with the needs and demands of narrative fiction?
So a simple, straightforward question. The novel is very episodic because there are such long historical sections, sometimes almost novella length on their own. And those were written, each of them on its own. So I would do the research for a particular period and immerse myself in it. Not at that point really knowing how my character is going to fit into that period, just getting a feel for the broad strokes and the details of the period. And I make, as I go through each of the books that I'm using as a resource, I make pencil lines in the margin of passages that I think will be particularly useful for me. And then I type those passages into a table. So I end up with pages and pages and pages of these notes. And then start to, as I'm doing that, I'm feeling my way through the history, looking for where the character will fit there. But just as a quick example, there's a section set during a papal crusade through the Baltic states. And that conflict lasted 200 or 300 years. I didn't know when I was researching it which particular bit of it I was going to use. But that gradually kind of arose from what I was looking at the period and how I felt I wanted Troan, because it was a section that she was in, to find her own narrative in the period. And once I get to that point, I'm not writing history, I'm writing fiction. So at that point, I know my character, I know the setting, and then the character has a narrative arc there that's informed by the history, but I hope that wears the history lightly.
Okay, I'm just going to jump back to that for a second because I'm curious. So can you just tell a little bit more about like what takes precedence in those two things, or like what's more important?
Right, I didn't get to that part of your question. Okay. I try to be as true to the history as possible, but because I'm writing fiction, not history, one of my rules of thumb is tie goes to the narrative. So if I have to tweak the history a little bit for the benefit of the story, then I will do that, but I try to do that as little as possible.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on for this specific question for Ashraf. No peeking. Okay. No, all of these authors are just answering kind of on the fly off the top of their head, which I find really impressive. Okay, what I found so beautiful about this engrossing coming of age novel was how completely I disappeared into the main character Aziz's fully constructed, fully imagined world. Readers can identify with his struggle to understand himself and to figure out the kind of man and person he wants to become within the backdrop of long-standing occupation. In the face of the continual uncertainty Aziz faces, I was left with a sense of the immense resiliency of the human spirit and our inclination toward hope. While reading, I found myself particularly drawn to the female characters in the novel. We have neighbor Nuha, for whom Aziz has complicated feelings. He holds pleasant memories of Nuha, but also describes her as the neighborhood whore. In contrast, we have Aziz's mother, who is portrayed as traditional, loyal, and engaged in servitude. But then we also have these glimpses into her psyche where she's sort of like checked out and far away, right? And both of these women leave at different points in the novel. We also have Aunt Sarah, the Westerner, and Daphne from the cafe, Aziz's love interest, among other female characters. So Ashraf, what was important for you to show in the depiction of these female characters? And what role do female characters play in Seven Heavens Away?
Saving the toughest for me.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. So basically, let me start with setup of the place or the world of the story. Just wanted to start with, it was really hard to describe Jerusalem without leaning on cliches and tropes. Because, like a lot of books describe Jerusalem based on a tourist guide, based on Abrahamic religions, based on so many symbols. So I wanted to build Jerusalem from the bottom up, based on vernacular language, based on society, based on community. And female characters are part of that. So I wanted to show a variety of characters, female characters, that basically describe and show East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem as well, Jewish, Muslim. I didn't have a Christian character, I think. But basically, I wanted to show different vibes and kind of unpack stereotypes because, some of the characters could be like very strong, could be also very weak, and like jumping from scene to the next scene. I wanted, especially because this story, it's not a political story per se, but it leans on many political themes and symbols, and the context is clearly political. So I wanted the characters not to be cartoonish and to be understood also to the Canadian audience and to the Western audience without, like showing stuff that looks more like Hollywood or looks more like generic or looks more like the girl next door. So Noha is very strong. And I tried, I hope I succeeded in leading to that image. And it pained me that Aziz was basically like, he's going in that direction to describe her in the worst terms and labels. Because he was so upset with her eventually through like the sequence of events. And so Noha is basically guardian angel. Noha is Sarah, and Noha is his neighbor. His mom is, she wants to be stronger, but she's basically oppressed by the father, by his father. So yeah, I tried. I had kind of a map when I started. I tried to stick with it, and somehow they live their way as well. So I'm not 100% responsible.
Yeah, I was going to say, did they talk to you? Like, how does that work for you? Do you want to listen to that?
They talked to me, especially towards the end. Like in the beginning, as they say, the first 50 pages are, like you're so constrained and you have so many rules and so many boundaries and limitations. But then it's more fun in the middle, like in Act 2, but towards like Act 3 and like towards the end, characters are more confident and they try to have their own way and they try to choose their own adventure.
I love that. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, now the next question is going to be for all three of you. So maybe I'll have Ashraf, then Kevin, and then Lucy sort of respond, if that works. So when I was reading these three books and looking for commonalities that may or may not connect these works, I quickly came to realize that A Quilting of Scars, Seven Heavens Away, and Stand on Guard all deal with themes of secrecy and deception. In each case, these characters hide their true identities as a matter of survival. This element of deception is revelatory and speaks to a very real element of human nature that can arise, like a feeling, a compulsion, a desire, a need, a reality to conceal the full complexity of our identity, often from the people closest to us. And there's an interesting paradox in that while these characters are trying to hide, they also want to be seen and loved for who they truly are by the people they care about. So, dear authors, can you talk about the role of secrets, secrecy, lies, and deception in your novels? And Ashraf, I'm going to start with you.
Yes. Basically, Aziz is torn between desire and discipline. So desire, when we talk about his neighbor, for example, he's fantasizing about her. He's also on the other side of the equation. He wants his own group. He wants to identify as a fighter. He wants to identify with the Palestinian cause, but at the same time, like he has feelings towards Noah and then Daphna and then. So he's torn and then he can't reveal his desires to his parents. He cannot tell his friends, even his friend Mustafa or even Yusuf. He is basically, there's fear and there's also lack of trust because he doesn't trust people around him. And it's kind of like a layer because his father teaches him not to trust. Don't go to West Jerusalem, for example. He tells him, don't go to West Jerusalem. Because he's worried. He's concerned. He doesn't want him to get hurt. But at the same time, this implants something in his psyche. Like he's scared. Don't trust the neighbor, Abu Hassan tells him, like the leader of the circle, sincere heart. So at that age, around that age, 15, 16, when you have fear and you have lack of trust, you tend to hide everything. And then hiding everything basically reflects itself in your actions. And then you're more anxious. And then eventually, like the highest layer is the head of Israeli intelligence, where basically somebody who's invisible. You're facing him in the end, and then everything gets unpacked. Everything gets, everything is on the table, and like what's going on.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Pass it down. Thank you.
Yeah, Stan's whole life is about deception because, well, as Trollin puts it in that little bit I read at the beginning, you only tell your story to people you can trust. Because no one's going to believe that he's 3,200 years old. And he has to change his visible identity very frequently in order to continue to function in society. And I think maybe where I had the most fun with that was there's a section where he is in what we would now call a mental health facility in Germany, where the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche is a patient because he's had quite a severe cognitive breakdown. And Stan is in there for his own reasons. And he has to meet with the chief psychiatrist periodically to work through the reasons why he's there. And at a certain point, he just decides, you know what, I'm just gonna give this guy the truth. And he says, you know, I was born in the Hittite Empire, I'm 3,200 years old. And the psychiatrist, to his great credit, isn't dismissive about it. He just treats it as, okay, this is where we're going now. And he assumes it's a psychotic break of some kind. But he's respectful about it, and he considers it a way to help Stan work through some things. And for Stan, it's completely liberated because he's now in a place where he can be absolutely honest about who he is, and people are just going to think that it's a delusion, and that's okay.
Thank you. Adele, I think you're right. I think secrecy and trust are really important. And certainly in A Quilting of Scars, that's true. Larkin carries a number of secrets, secrets about the night of the fire, but also secrets about his own personhood. He has questions about his own sexuality, and he is afraid to share that questioning with his family or with anyone really. He's afraid of what would happen to him in society. He's afraid of being condemned by the church and by the community. And so all of these secrets are just internalized and create that black cloud and that panic that he fights all of his life long. And for me, I'll just add very quickly, my career was as a high school administrator, and I worked with a number of young people who had questions about their sexuality, who weren't always comfortable sharing with their families. And unfortunately, many of the young people who disclosed their questions or came out of the closet, so to speak, were often cast out of their family homes. And I found it heartbreaking that families who should love these beautiful young people unconditionally were not accepting of them. And so a lot of that experience is layered here in this book.
Thank you, Lucy. And I believe in the book, wasn't there also the risk of hanging at that time? You want to speak to that, or?
The hanging had to do with murder.
Okay.
And there was a murder in the book, and Larkin knows who murdered who. I don't want to give all the spoilers away, but had he told the truth, there would have been a hanging.
Thank you for clarifying that. Okay. The next question. Titles are such an important decision that we make as authors because they stand to represent the work for the reader/audience. Titles are a bold proclamation of the substance within. So can you each just explain the significance of the title that you chose and or tell the story of how the title came to be? And this time we'll go Lucy, Kevin, and then Ashraf.
Thank you. Okay. Hard to talk about. But when I was a young person in school, in elementary school, there was a little boy in my classroom. We were in grade 2. His name was Stephen. And he would come to school every day and sit down at his desk and weep. And he was never made to stand up for the Lord's Prayer or God Save the Queen or the national anthem. And never really understood why until we were playing outdoors at recess one day. And I saw long bloody stripes on his back, and his shirt was stuck to his back, these bloody stripes. And I realized then that he had been beaten with a belt by his father. And so that image has stuck with me all of my life. And I have a character in the novel who was physically abused by his father. And Larkin sees this and sees the quilting of scars on this young boy's back. And that's where the title comes from.
Yeah, I got nothing. I wanted to make a cheap pun on stand on guard, fit that. Also in the first book, there's a subtitle, it's Call Me Stan, A Tragedy in 3 Millennia. I wanted a subtitle that had something to do with two, and so eventually settled on a 2-part invention. And I think that worked nicely because we had the 2 voices rated through.
Yes, I had 4 or 5 titles for this title. And because I'm a poet for novels, I looked at the prologue basically, and I got my title from the prologue. And 7 Heavens Away is the last 3 words of the prologue. And I think it fits nicely because I wanted to describe 3 things: distance, physical distance that separates the protagonist from his desires, from his friends, from his family, from everything. I wanted to describe loss, especially irretrievable loss. And the 3rd thing, I want to describe God's mercy, which is actual heaven. So I wanted to basically have these 3 things, or 3 meanings in one title.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thanks to all of you. Okay. Next, in comparing these 3 novels, they all look a little bit different on the page. Okay. So can you talk about how you decided to structure your novels? And I mean structure in the sense of the physical organization of the text itself, right? Lucy, you went with no chapters at all. Readers get 1 continuous narrative thread. So I'm curious to hear about that. Ashraf, you use traditional numbered chapters with no names. And at the beginning of each chapter, we have a date. I found the dates really helpful, but could you kind of speak to that decision? And then Kevin, your book is divided by voice/storyline, as you sort of mentioned, whatever storyline we're sort of experiencing. Either Stan or Trowan are 2 main immortal characters, while also navigating/helping to delineate large movements backwards and forwards in time up to present day. So can each of you please speak to the structural organization of your novels? And Kevin, let's start with you this time, then Ashraf, then Lucy.
Okay, the first book was all in Stan's voice, and it had an overarching present day arc, and then these longer historical sections that the present day are linked together. And there was a kind of urgency to the present day one, so it was structured in terms of when it was happening. So 6 weeks ago, 5 days ago, 2 days ago, now, that kind of thing. And then the historical ones had titles that were based on the historical period or the main historical character in that period. I wanted to keep some of that, but I didn't feel that for this one, having the chapter titles related to the historical periods would work, because there were too many moving parts having 2 narrators. So it was simplest for me, and I think clearest for the reader, just to have the Stan sections begin saying Stan, and the Trowan sections to begin saying Trowan, and then to have each of the characters have their own font to help distinguish who we're hearing kind of which.
Yes, I'll borrow something from yes, so basically I'm talking about 2015 to 2016, so the historical period made sense to me, starting from fall and ending in spring. And I wanted to stay faithful to the actual historical period where the what they call knife intifada happened in Jerusalem. Now, the dates came actually after. And I felt that the narrative was a little bit fragmented, maybe, or jumping around. So I wanted to kind of organize and structure the narrative in a way that would be, the pacing could basically, be better organized and improved.
This novel takes place during the course of one very long evening, where Larkin is reminiscing. So it made sense to me not to break that recollection up with chapters. But having said that, there are things that he remembers, like a court trial, and he has a scrapbook that he looks at. So the text is broken up with different fonts and spacing when things are happening like that he remembers. So if you don't want to read the whole book in one go and you need a stopping place, there are stopping places. But it's essentially the whole thing takes place in one evening.
Thank you. And yeah, I love those touch points that we were kind of all in that moment and then going back in time was lovely. Okay. Does anyone have questions in the audience? I'm just sort of doing a quick scan. Maybe start thinking about if you do have any questions because it's getting close to that time. But I have many more questions, so I can also just keep going. Okay, so next question. This is sort of a big one, or maybe a more personal answer. So what compelled you to write the book that you did? So Lucy, why did you feel drawn to tell Larkin's story? A lonely farmer at the end of the 19th century who holds many dark secrets. And Ashraf, a Palestinian teenager's coming-of-age story set in Jerusalem. And Kevin, two intertwining tales of mortals who drop in and move through different periods in time. Like, why is this a story that you needed to tell? Let's go. Everyone's looking like, who's it going to be? Lucy, Ashraf, and then Kevin. Is that okay?
I've already mentioned that Larkin had questions about his sexuality, and as an administrator who spent my career problem solving and trying to support young people and mediate with families, I thought that it was important to explore the kinds of things that led to that sort of family dysfunction, if you will, and to the conflict that Larkin had internalized. And even though the book is dated 1909, I think many of the themes are very contemporary. But I love historical fiction, and it was easier for me to place it in a historical context. And one of the things I felt very strongly about was that in terms of Ontario history, we were very much a Victorian province, far longer than Victoria lived. We were very conservative for a very long time. And I think that the church perpetuated that. And I think a lot of feelings about homosexuality and the censure of that was perpetuated by the church. And I think did a lot of harm to a lot of beautiful young people. And I really, at this point in my life, just wanted to speak out to that. I think times have changed. I hope times have changed, that people are much more accepting, much more understanding. But I think it's important that we allow people to find themselves and to be who they are and to take up their own space. And I just wanted to draw attention to some of those things.
Yes, for me, it was partly moral obligation. I wanted to tell the story of these young people and to basically humanize them, put them in a book. Because every time people talk about Jerusalem, it's either the Bible, Quran, Old Testament, New Testament, pictures. Even in the pictures, you see, like the mosques and the synagogues and the churches. You don't see people, like you see people as, like shadows and silhouettes. And I felt that this novel had to be written. If I succeeded or not, I mean, this can be I judged with time, over time. But yeah, it was basically moral obligation, and I wanted to tell the story.
Yeah, my answer is going to be more playful, I think, in that, I wrote a book with a bunch of historical sections, and I chose them because they caught my fancy. And I researched them and found ways to link them together into a book. But it was really my curiosity about periods of history, sometimes periods that are lesser known, or events that are lesser known. And after that book was done, I was still spotting these things that caught my fancy, and I knew I wanted to put more of them into a book. And I kind of run out of runway with Stan because I got it up to the 1950s. And if I wanted to go back in history, I wanted to keep the format as much as I could, but I didn't just want to say, well, let's just go start over again. So a way I was able to do that was by bringing in this character who we already knew, and having that cat and mouse thing with the two of them. And it also let me put Trowan into places where I couldn't put Stan because Stan was already doing something else during that century.
Playfulness is a great reason. There's so many great reasons to write a book. Okay, are there any questions from the audience? All right. If you change your mind, you can just make eyes at me. I guess maybe I'll just give you each an opportunity. There's sort of like if you're interviewing someone, you can sort of say at the end, is there anything that you wanted to say that I didn't ask you? This is a great interview question. So I guess maybe to frame it in the context of a novel, is there something that you wish everyone knew or understood about your novel? Or what is something that you want readers to take away from the story after having read it? Does anyone want to jump on that one? Maybe we'll go back.
Yeah, I mean, for this book, I just hope that people read it with open eyes and without prejudgments or without thinking that, okay, like he's a Palestinian writer, he's going to be a propagandist, he's going to talk about from the river to the sea, he's going to talk about East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem, Jewish and Arabs as enemies, he's going to talk about all these kind of, stereotypes. I hope that people can give this book a chance and read it and try to unpack what's inside and try to understand that, because there are so many lives, there are so many stories, and I try to write it that way. So hopefully it will arrive to their hearts and minds.
Okay. I'll pick a historical period because it appeals to me, but also because there are things in there that people may not know, or people may make assumptions about that turn out not to be warranted. Part of what attracted me to the end of Nietzsche's life was how the Nazis appropriated his philosophy and his writings as an excuse for their master race ideology. And there's room in what he wrote for that, very much so. But also, he was against anti-Semitism. He was very firmly disapproving of anti-Semitism. And part of how the Nazis were able to pick and choose from his stuff and twist it to their anti-Semitic ends had to do with how Nietzsche's sister edited his unpublished writings after his death. And so, once I got more and more into Nietzsche's story, I'd known a little bit about that, but that was something I wanted to bring out was, not necessarily an admirable guy. I'm not necessarily a fan, but at least let's be fair about it and give him credit where credit is due, and not tar him with the brush of everything the Nazis.
Thank you, and that's a really important message for now, isn't it? This book is dedicated to the Larkins of the world, because I believe that there are many people who still don't feel free to be upfront and honest with other people in their lives about who they really are deep inside. And I guess the message that I hope that I leave is the importance of unconditional love and acceptance, and how important that is for people in terms of mental health, but in terms of their life trajectory, in terms of being able to live a fulfilled life.
Okay, what I hope is an easy question to end the evening on here. Oh, Sam's got a question.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
But I feel at a distinct disadvantage since I haven't read any of the books. But I'm just wondering, particularly for Lucy, I was thinking about this because your book takes place in one day or one evening, but I'm certain it pertains to everyone. So how do you keep building the tension or keep the pace going, keep the momentum going so the reader is constantly interested?
I don't know, is the reader constantly interested? I think what I attempted to do here anyway was not give away too much all at once. And Larkin has a scrapbook, and as he turns the pages in the scrapbook, we learn more and more about what happened in his childhood and during the night of the fire, and how the events of that horrific night have played out in his life. So I think by feeding the reader little tiny pieces of information as we go along, I hope that keeps you interested. I hope it keeps you interested.
Do either of you want to speak to that? How do you keep the reader engaged?
Yeah, keep the tension and the momentum building.
I just keep throwing stuff at the reader. Here's stuff in the present day where these people seem to be doing the, as I said before, the cat and mouse thing, and where's that going to go? But also, here's a whole bunch of stuff happening at the time of Odysseus. Here's a whole bunch of stuff happening. There's lots of stuff to keep the reader stick.
Yeah, things happening, surprises, surprises are good. To start, like with a bang and end with a bang. Oh, well, literally it is.
Okay, I'm going to end with what I hope is a simple, easy question. What are you working on now?
Yes, I'm working on a more adultish version of Aziz. More on the adult side, more also happening in Jerusalem. So I'm excited about it, and I'm still playing with it. So it's not going to be. Maybe I'm planning maybe towards the end of the year to have a first round. So.
I am working on another Stan novel. I'm hoping to have a first draft by the end of the year as well. And I hope I've found a way to use again a similar format so that there's a familiarity, but again, to make it fresh.
That's exciting, fun. I'm working on 2 projects right now. A year from now, I have a book coming out. Publishers typesetting it right now. It's called The Mural. And it's about a young woman who really bought into a hallmark understanding of romance. And she falls in love with a painter. And he disappears and her life falls apart. And she has to try to rebuild her life and discovers that you don't necessarily live happily ever after. And that a committed relationship isn't necessarily transactional. So it's a little bit different. It's placed in 1980s Toronto. And I'm quite excited about it. And the other project that I'm working on, I am co-editing with my friend Adelle Purdham, a collection of work on mothering. And we have about 35 writers who have contributed poems and short stories and essays on mothering. And it's really an exploration, a very deep exploration of how mothering impacts us and what mothering means today in terms of being a feminist. It's a really exciting project, and we're hoping to have our first draft pulled together for fall so we can start pitching to publishers.
Okay, that all sounds wonderful. And we do have one of the contributors to the anthology here tonight. Kirsten's here. Just to put her on the spot. Yeah, that's going to be fabulous. And all of your work, that sounds very exciting. I look forward to diving in. I think this is the point of the evening where we get to have a little bit of a raffle, and Heather's going to come up for that. And then we'll kind of figure out what the next event is going to be. But I'm just going to take a minute to say thank you so much, and we could recognize the wonderful authors here. Congratulations on your beautiful work. And I hope everyone can pick up a copy on their way out and tell your friends about it.
All right, if you haven't got a raffle ticket yet, Kaylee over there, you can get one from them, and do it fast because I'm going to take some pictures and then we want to do the raffle. So,
Would you want to tell me?
oh yes, there is book bundles. One is a special Poetry Month bundle. Another bundle is the authors tonight, and then the other third bundle, I believe, is from some miscellaneous publishers, correct?
It's just a free pool.
Well, no, they have to pay.
Oh. It's worth it.
It's worth it. You're getting way more than just, So, hang on a second. I'm making part of this up. Anyone last minute need to get a raffle? Last minute?
What's the next one?
Yeah, please hold up your footprints. So I'm gonna actually put this here. No, it's not. All right, now I'm going to just take the fruit from you guys. I'm going to take a couple more of you. Yeah, no, something back. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Awesome, excited.
All right. So, one more. Okay. All righty. Okay. So, first up, we have the books, 3 books. Nice, awesome authors. Can I get a little bit of drum roll, please? All right. And the winner is Sarah E. free poetry. Drum roll. And the winner is Craig H. All right. Last, but definitely not least, we've got 3 different books. I Left You Behind, What a Fish Looks Like, and Most Grievous Faults. All right, we need another drum roll. So that fuse back together. All right. Oh, did you put in 2, Sarah?
There's a couple, but please pass it on.
Okay. That's sweet. All right. Drum roll again then. Oh my God! You know this never happened before. All right. One more time, otherwise I don't know. I think that the world is telling me something. Great. All right. Well, we've had a really interesting. All right. One more drum roll. Gotta be it. All right. Stephanie W. Alrighty. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you to our wonderful readers, our fabulous guest host, Adele. We'll be back in 1 month. Or approximately 1 month, because I'm not good at dates. That'll be on May 3rd with Liz Johnson, Carrie Clare, and Alice Fitzpatrick. And then we've got a first 30 with Umar Taraki on April 23rd, which was online and on social media. So please come to our next events. Follow us on social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook and also Blue Sky. And thank you all for coming. Good night. Good night.